morning, JK.
Good morning, Alex. It's another beautiful day down the Glen.
Glorious, isn't it? And a day of polishing something that's not hissing steam.
Yeah, so annually we like to try and get the diesels and the electric locomotives out. We give them a run, and also we're finding that there's a growing interest, I suppose, as there's fewer and fewer people around who remember steam in the real world, if you like, and there's a growing affection for the internal combustion engines and some of the diesel fleets. So we like to make sure that at least once a year they get the opportunity to haul some passengers.
And this locomotive, this is the one for the untrained eye that people get confused over, because of course it's a steam outline.
Yeah, it's a steam outline locomotive. It was built by Bagley's. We'll come back to Bagley. Bagley was the chief draftsman at Bagnall's in the 1890s, and he was responsible for designing Sea Lion. And then he left Bagnall's and he set up on his own, and he produced several of these for Butlins. This is number 3232, built in 1947, and she spent most of her life at Butlins at Clacton-on-Sea. For those old enough to remember, the BBC Heidi High comedy was filmed at Clacton, and this locomotive features in the opening and closing credits for that series. So go back and Google it. There's some good footage on YouTube of the locomotive hauling trains at Clacton. But it spent most of its working life at Clacton, and then when it did a season at Minehead, I believe, and then when the railways at Butlins closed, it went into private ownership, and it ultimately ended up with Alan Keefe's Ross-on-Wye, from where it was purchased by one of our volunteers with the intention of restoring it. So it arrived back at Groudle, I think in about 1998 from memory, something like that, late 90s. We started some work restoring it here on the ground, but quite quickly realised it was a little bit more worn out than maybe we thought, and particularly the wheel sets. It had spent most of its time going round in a big circle, and so the wheel set that took most of the load as it was going round in circles had almost entirely worn away. And when we put the wheels in the lathe to try and machine the flanges down, we realised that a big ring had been welded onto the back of the wheel to try and repair that damage. So that kind of stopped the job for a while, and it sat, and then eventually we were fortunate enough that the owner kindly donated it to the railway, at which point we were able to raise some funds to have it overhauled, and here it is. It came back in 2017, but it's quite interesting that we've got one of Bagley's locos that was built for passenger carrying, touristy type, holiday maker sort of operation, sitting on a line that also has one of his steam engines from his earlier career.
And the relevance of her name, because she was Paracoom when we got her.
She was Paracoom. So in Butlins service, she was never named. She was always 3232. They were just numbered, and interestingly, the coaches that ran with them were numbered sequentially. So 3233 and 3234 were coaches that ran with this locomotive. But in her latter days, she worked on the fundraising railway for the Linton and Barnstaple, and she was named Paracoom when she was working for the Linton and Barnstaple. Again, no real historical precedent for that. We thought about what we were going to do. We were going to leave it unnamed, but we decided actually we would name her Maltby, and she's named after Richard Maltby Broadbent, who was the founder of this railway back in 1896.
So obviously she's not the only diesel in service today. Should we go and check out the others?
She's not the only diesel in service. We can go and check out the others.
So obviously, Jonathan, less of a steam outline, really, but still diesel.
Very much less of a steam outline, but very much still diesel. So this is Dolphin, built by Robert Hudson and Company in 1952. She's one of two that are on the railway. We've got this one and the sister Walrus, which is away under overhaul at the moment. They were both built for the Hall and Ham River Company, so they were gravel contractors down the south of England. Right at the end, really, of when industrial railways were being used for that type of thing. 'Cause in the 1950s, there was plenty of road transport around, and it wasn't long after that before all of those industries that were relying on narrow gauge railways for transporting materials converted across to using more convenient lorries and road transport. So these that had a fairly short working life, but they would have been pulling tipper wagons full of gravel. They were the gravel contractors they worked for, so tipper wagons full of gravel, Leighton Buzzard style for people that know their narrow gauge railways. And then when when they finished their commercial life, they made their way to Doddington Park, which I believe is now owned by James Dyson, of the Hoover fame, or shouldn't say Hoover,
Vacuum.
Dyson vacuum fame. And there was a state railway at Donington Park, and this one and the sister loco ran around the estate railway until that folded. When the entire railway was purchased by the restoration project that was getting underway here at Groudle, we were very lucky. We were able to purchase the entire railway from Donington Park when they were closing down, and that included the 2 diesel locomotives, quite a bit of £20 rail, sleepers and track fittings, etc., and the underframes for 2 bogie coaches, and that is what started the project here at Groudle. We were able to ship most of that back to the island, dismantle it over various weekends, and then rebuild it here at Groudle. So these are as much a part of Groudle's history now really as they have been anywhere else. They've served us well over the years. They can pull pretty much anything we've got. They're powered by Gardner 2LW engines. This one's been overhauled by some of our volunteers in the last couple of years. But these were an optional extra when the locos were supplied. Most of these were supplied with Ailsa Craig engines, I believe, but you could pay a bit more and get a Gardner. These are very common in kind of industrial equipment of the time. They're also quite common in narrowboats. You see larger versions in fishing boats, etc. It's a very reliable design, and you can still get, as we're finding with Walrus, which is under overhaul, you can still get all the parts and all the bits for Gardner engines now.
Excellent. So obviously Walrus isn't here today, but for Diesel Electric Day, there's the electric that's missing.
There is, and we'll come back to that one.
Yep. Okay, we'll go and seek out where she's gone.
Reputation. You have a reputation, Chris, on it.
Well, although it's Diesel Electric Day, people do still expect a steamer, so we've got a steamer out as well. So, morning, Tim.
Morning.
Now, you obviously are the more old-fashioned exhibit today.
Thanks.
Yes.
I'm actually younger than you, but you know.
Yeah, only just.
Yeah.
But in terms of the role today, because
Yes.
yeah, is it going to be an easy day? Because from a point of view of driving and managing a boiler,
Yeah.
I don't think people realise that it's possibly easier to keep going up and down than sitting doing nothing. in between
Yeah,
turns.
absolutely. When you're sat at the other end and not got a train to pull, and you're trying to keep your fire going, not have it fizzing off too much, but keep the boiler pressure. So it's a nice little balance that you've got to do.
The only thing is, though, we do swap locomotives at the cafe end, so that's not too bad for you.
There's advantages: tea,
Yeah.
cake,
Yeah, yes.
ice cream.
Yes, although of course we're encouraging lots of other people to buy it as well, but I'm sure there'll be some for staff.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. Secret under the counter cake as well, hopefully.
Exactly. Have you seen the chairman around anywhere?
I've not seen him. I mean, he's probably near the cake. That's probably
Yeah.
a good place to check.
Not doing any work.
No, don't be silly.
So we've done diesel.
We have.
We're now
This
to electric.
one isn't diesel.
This one is
is
not
very
diesel.
much not diesel. I suppose people will generally associate Groudle with being a steam railway, and for most of its working life it has been a steam railway, and of course that's what we advertise today. And if you come to visit the line, you will generally be hauled by one of our beautifully restored steam fleet. However, what you might not know is there was a period of time in Groudle's history when it very much wasn't a steam line, and they experimented with some early battery electric locomotives. So in the 1920s, when the railway reopened after the First World War, let me get my dates right, the steam engines were worn out. You could imagine Sea Line was 1896, Polar Bear came along in 1905. They'd worked hard up until the war, and then they probably weren't given very much maintenance during the war years. So when the owners came to reopen the railway in the 20s, they had a choice. They could either restore or overhaul the steam locos, or they could experiment with this new fandangled motive powered by electricity. And that's exactly what they did. And from British Electric Vehicles, they purchased 2 battery electric locos, which they very imaginatively named Sea Lion and Polar Bear, the same as the steam locos. They're quite straightforward. They're 040s. They have batteries in the 2 compartments at either end, motors under the floor. And they ran for a number of years, not particularly successfully. And if you buy our excellent book on the history of Groudle, or just look at some of the historical photographs that are around, you'll see that they went through a variety of different configurations. So they seem to have been notoriously unstable. They started off when delivered as 040s, and then a few years later they gain carrying wheels outside of the main driving wheels, and then later on again you see them with 4-wheel battery tenders in front of the locos. Now, Whether that was to provide greater stability or whether it was to provide greater range, we'll never quite know. But they disappeared relatively quickly, and thankfully for us, the original steam locomotives were overhauled and put back into service. Now this one is actually a replica. So the mechanics of this came from the same company, who's still in production, built in 1988, the underframe for a tunnelling job. I think it was used for one job and then pretty much put into store. So it's very, very similar in terms of the mechanics. The control gear is modern, and cosmetically this one was created to look like the engines that ran here in the 1920s. It arrived at Groudle in the early 2000s. I'm trying to remember exactly the year we got it, but it's the early 2000s, and it was rebuilt by Alan Keefs at Ross-on-Wye.
And in terms of the batteries in each end, it's not just a few double A's, is it really?
They're not double A's, no. They're quite deep lead acid cells, a number of them in each end that provide the tractive effort. So it's very basic electric technology, but very environmentally friendly.
Yeah, that is true. And also, as you'll appreciate, last week when we normally run the last train of the day, but she was having some paintwork done, so it's normally quite nice for a steam locomotive driver.
We tend to use, if you come to visit Groudle later on in the day, you will generally see either the battery electric or one of our diesels out on the last train of the day. And the reason we do that is it takes a bit of time now with the tea room set up at Sealand Rocks to close everything down, bring all the staff and all the stock and sort all of that stuff out. So it's usually easier to run the last train of the day with an internal combustion or a battery engine and allow the steam driver, who's been here since 7 o'clock in the morning, to dispose of the engine, so we all walk out of the Glen at the same time.
And I'm going to go and try and find the chairman. Have you spotted him anywhere?
I haven't seen him this morning, Alex. No, I haven't seen him this morning. But good luck.
Yes, exactly. And your locomotive there behind you, Maltby, you seem to have dirtied the paintwork now.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
you're gonna have to
we're
go
on to that. Don't worry about
Yes,
it. We're on to that.
Right, yeah, okay. I'll go and find the chairman.
See you later.
There's still a hive of activity down here as everyone's getting prepared for Diesel and Electric Day, but I know the big question that's on everyone's lips is, where is Mr. Chairman? Well, you know, doing what he should be doing, let's be honest. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good
In
morning.
the toilets. This is hands-on management.
Oh, it is hands-on management, yes. You know.
We actually very rarely talk about these new facilities, but they have been very popular.
Yes, well, needs must.
Yeah, but this has been your project over the winter, pretty much, is building toilets.
Yeah, I didn't think that I'd have to clean them so regularly, but I thought once they're built, that's me done.
No. It's the chairman's role to clean the toilets.
It is, yes.
Now, obviously, Diesel Electric Day, we like Diesel Electric Day. It's get the toys out.
We do, because they played their part. Very much. I've no doubt that a certain somebody has just explained in greater detail than me, but yeah.
Yes.
Going back in the 1920s and in the 1980s, without diesels and electric, mind you, having said that, I assume Jonathan explained that we have to be grateful that the electrics failed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have our steamers.
No, good point. Yes.
Yes.
Well, they were in their infancy, weren't they?
Yes. It was forethought, I suppose, probably influenced by these trams going up and down. Give it a go.
And it didn't really work.
Well, it did for a year or two, but thankfully they
Do we
went
know
up to
how the electrics in the 20s were charged?
No. In all the archive photographs that I've got, of which there are thousands, there is not one where you can go,
It's plugged
so
in.
we have no clue. I mean, things do come out the woodwork with regular basis, things that we've been, hoping that we'd see for the last 100 years, and suddenly somebody would have a photograph and you go, yes. So I don't give up hope, but they must have charged them somehow.
Yes. Well,
But we've never seen what infrastructure that was, whether it was inside a building, whether it was a post or whatever to charge them up. I have no idea.
So if anyone's got any information, get in touch.
Oh, that'd be lovely.
Yeah. I'm not going to take you away from your job too much because I know how important it is.
This is just the start. I've got to go from this end to that end, and it takes about an hour. So
Okay, well, leave you to it. We'll just plunge you in.
Don't-
Engaged.
Get off.